The Great Society. Lyndon Baines Johnson was a Texan, not very wealthy, but he was well off and styled himself as a New Dealer, so he really wanted that connection to Franklin Roosevelt. Johnson's domestic agenda, once he becomes president after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, he is going to continue Kennedy's war on poverty, and he will do that with a number of different acts and organizations that he will create. First, he is going to pass in 1964 the Economic Opportunity Act. This will delegate $1 billion for youth programs, anti-poverty measures, small business loans, and job training in order to give people economic opportunity. The next thing is a group that he will create, which is called Job Corps. And this is a youth training program that would get people involved in whatever field of study they were interested in, or whatever field of job that they were interested in, get them training at a younger age. VISTA is the Volunteers in Service to America. And this is going to be kind of like Peace Corps, but it's more for the problems that are in the U.S., and so it'll address those issues. Project Head Start will also be created, and it's an education program for underprivileged preschoolers to allow them to attend school and get them ready for kindergarten. The Appalachian Regional Development Act will be passed in 1965, and this is going to target a 12-state area that was very depressed economically, very white, very rural, very backwoods kind of thing. And the economy is not so much the problem there, but other factors like alcohol abuse, teen pregnancy, health issues, education levels. Those are going to be some of the issues that are going to be dealt with under the Appalachian Regional Development Act. In 1964, we have another election year, and Lyndon Johnson was very popular. He's the Democrat. He is now going to be trying for his own term. He had served out the rest of JFK's term, and now he is looking for his own term of office. He is up against Barry Goldwater, the Republican senator from Arizona. And Barry Goldwater is going to believe in a very limited government, that government shouldn't be as involved as what the Democrats wanted. And his foreign affairs, his foreign policy was a little iffy. People were very, very worried that Goldwater might actually use nuclear weapons on Cuba or Vietnam. They're very concerned about what his decision-making might include. So Lyndon Johnson's going to win this election by a landslide. Landslide. He wins about 61% of the popular votes. That's the highest percentage since the 1936 election, and he wins 90% of the Electoral College. So he does very, very well. So now Johnson has his own term, and he is going to bring about the Great Society. This is Lyndon Johnson's vision for America. He is going to pass landmark legislation in order to make some major changes in the American domestic landscape. For example, in education, he will pass the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. This will provide federal aid to help public and parochial schools to purchase things like textbooks or library materials or technology, all that kind of stuff. He will also help to create more Social Security. Medicare and Medicaid will be created. Medicare is hospital insurance and low-cost medical insurance for those who are 65 and older. Medicaid is health insurance for welfare recipients. So a good way to remember the difference is that Medicaid, you are aiding somebody who is in need, whereas Medicare, you are caring for the elderly. So that's the difference between the two. He will address also issues in housing, creating low-rent public housing. He creates a new cabinet department called the Housing and Urban Development Cabinet Department, which is their job is to create low-income housing and to get rid of slums and all that kind of stuff. He also addresses the issue of immigration. The Immigration Act of 1965 will set an annual quota of 170,000 immigrants that can be allowed in from the Eastern Hemisphere and 120,000 from the Western Hemisphere. Basically, also this will say that there's no more than 20,000 that can come in from any one nation. So if people wanted to come in from Venezuela, there could only be 20,000. You can't have any more than that. Exemptions to this would be any close relatives of Americans. So like if your parents were migrating, or if your siblings or your sons and daughters or whatever, close relatives would be exempted from that number. He also addresses problems with the environment. He is heavily influenced by a book called Silent Spring, which is written by Rachel Carson. And Silent Spring talks about the effects of pesticides on the environment. That, yes, pesticides are good, you get rid of the bad bugs that kill your crops, but they also have other damaging effects as well. And so eventually we're going to get to a place where we have a silent spring, no birds chirping, that kind of stuff. So she talks about those dangers. This is going to lead to the passage of the Water Quality Act of 1965. Also kind of dealing with this are safety laws. The Truth in Packaging law will be passed, and this is where companies have to label consumer goods so we know what's exactly in it. Safety standards for cars and for tires will be coming from this as well. We'll also see some reforms of the Warren Court. Remember, the Warren Commission was led by Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren, and he leads the Supreme Court. And so the Warren Court will also make some major decisions that will affect how Americans live. For example, the Brown versus Board of Education talks about the desegregation of Southern schools, where blacks and whites have to go to school together. They can't be segregated or separated anymore. We'll talk more about that in our next unit on civil rights. He also, the Warren Court will also ban prayer in schools. It will limit the power of communities to censor books or to censor films in their communities. It will extend the meaning of free speech to include things like symbolic speech. It also will address the rights of the accused. A number of cases come out that address the rights of the accused, like the case of Mapp versus Ohio, where evidence that is illegally seized cannot be used against you. So the cops have to basically follow a procedure. Gideon versus Wainwright talks about the fact that people who can't afford a lawyer should have access to legal counsel that's free, because you can't expect someone to be able to argue sensibly on their own if they have no background in it. The case of Escobedo versus Illinois, the right to have a lawyer present during questioning, so you know when and if you should be answering questions that the police pose to you. And the case of Miranda versus Arizona, where suspects are read their rights before questioning, that they have the right to remain silent, that anything they say could be used against them, and that they have a right to an attorney. So those things have to be stated before you are questioned. Well, the impact of the Great Society, the cost of funding it will increase our deficit. So it is very expensive to do this. However, the increasing involvement of the U.S. in Vietnam is going to draw a lot of funds away from these domestic programs. It is effective to some extent. 6 million people are going to move out of the poverty level, so it is successful in that rate. But the cost of it is very, very expensive. In 1961, we had 45 programs that were dealing with anti-poverty levels, and it cost us $9 billion. In 1969, we had 435 different programs that cost us $25.6 billion. So basically, we were spending $65 a year for every American that was in poverty in attempts to get them out of poverty. And like I said, 6 million do move out of the poverty level, so it was effective to some extent.